Hello, and welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast. My name is Matthew Harvey.
And my name is Stephen A. Mackay.
If you'd like to help us with our running costs and get exclusive bonus episodes every month, along with other great perks, check out our Patreon page and consider signing up from as little as £1 per month.
And if you enjoy this episode, please leave us a 5-star review and share our posts on Facebook, X, Blue Sky, and so on to help us get the word out there.
Patricia Bracewell is the author of the Emma of Normandy trilogy, which started with her first novel, Shadow on the Crown, and concluded with The Steel Beneath the Silk. She served as writer in residence at Gladstone's library in Wales and has appeared at many literary festivals and writing conferences in the US and the UK. We had the pleasure of meeting Patricia in Devon last year at the Historical Novel Society conference, so it's great to have a chance for a longer conversation now. Welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, Patricia Bracewell.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
It's good to have you here, Patricia.
Yeah,
I wish I was there with you. I wish I was in England right now.
Well, you don't wish you were in Scotland because it's been raining continuously for about a week. Horrible.
Oh, well, we can all use a little rain.
Yeah, sometimes.
Sometimes. A little.
Well, it's funny you should say this actually, because this is the first question that we've got for you. You're an American living in California. So how did you end up writing about medieval England?
I've been asked that question once or twice before. People are astonished by it. I grew up falling in love with everything English. I think the very first book that held a place in my heart was The Secret Garden. And I always wanted to go to England. I majored in English. And then when I was looking for something to write about, this is way towards the end of the end of my mature years. I discovered Emma of Normandy, and I didn't know anything about her, even though I'd taken classes in the history of England in college and had read lots of history and lots of books set in England. I didn't know Emma. And the more I found out about her, the more fascinated I became with her. And so that brought me not just into England, but into the 11th century, which I hadn't anticipated entering. So that's the story.
Okay, amazing. And to be honest, I mean, Emma of Normandy is not the most widely known historical character, is she? So it's great when you find these characters that are interesting, that you can actually write something about them, because lots of people obviously we end up as writers looking for people to write about, and if you go for a king or a queen, most of them have been, there's many of them have already been written about ad nauseum, and then you think, how can I find something new to write about? So yeah, great to find someone a little bit less well known, but also very exciting. So I read in your bio at the beginning there, in 2014, you served as writer in residence at Gladstone's library in Wales. So I don't really know what that means. So could you tell us a little bit about what that is and how did that come about? And what was that about?
That was a real honor, and just a wonderful 2 weeks. It was just 2 weeks. Gladstone's library exists in North Wales in Harden, and it was established by William Gladstone. And now it kind of bills itself as sleeping with books. You can go there. The library is just gorgeous. And it started with Gladstone's own collection of books. And they've built around it for a while. I believe it was a seminary, but now it is open to the public, and they have lovely rooms, and you can stay there and study. You can go and have tea at their cafe that they have there. They have lovely teas. You really should go if you haven't gone. And so every year they have writers in residence. There were 4 the year that I went, and they have a hearth festival where you spend a weekend and people from all over can come to the festival and listen to the 4 authors that are there speaking. We're interviewed and we have workshops over those 2 days. And I was very lucky to have applied and been accepted. I think I was the first American that was accepted, and there have been others since at the library. And I've been back at least once to say hello and have tea. So that's how that happened. It was a really wonderful experience. I spent 2 weeks, my head buried in the books in the library, studying, researching for what turned out to be the 3rd book. Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. How did you find out about it? How is it? Because you said you applied for it. It's the sort of thing that I would probably never have found out there was even that option.
I can't even remember the name. There used to be, I don't know if there still is, an online magazine, and they had something that showed photos of beautiful libraries. And I saw Gladstone's library, and I looked at that and I thought, oh my God, where is that? I want to see. So I looked it up and discovered that on their website they had this announcement about the Writers in Residence program. And so I downloaded the application, and there it was. And I happened to be in England, in London, researching when I received an email from the proctor of the library telling me that I'd been accepted. So that was pretty exciting.
That's great. I mean, it's something that's really interesting. Like I'm just thinking from the perspective of someone starting out, because you were early on in your career then as well, weren't you? You published the first book?
I had,
or had you published
the first book was already out. And so part of the process was you send in a copy of the book and tell them what you're working on for your second novel. But it was really helpful for me because it costs a lot of money to spend 2 weeks. Room and board in Wales. It was wonderful. It was really, really wonderful opportunity.
I'm just thinking like for authors, any stage of their career, but starting out, they might feel that they haven't got a shot at doing something like that, but it just goes to prove that, if you actually apply for these sort of things,
you never know.
If you don't apply, you're definitely not going to get accepted.
That's right.
But if you apply, you've definitely got a chance. So
you have nothing to lose.
Brilliant.
Well, your novels are set in late Anglo-Saxon England. How do you balance historical accuracy with crafting a compelling story?
It's not easy. It's especially not easy because there's not a lot about what the women were doing in the late 11th century. So I say it's not easy. In a way, that made it easier because I could make a lot more up because we don't know what they were doing.
I know they can say you're wrong.
That's right. People sometimes do try. You find little bits of information that you throw in and think you're being very clever, and then someone says, that's not right. And then you have to go back and support what you put, So I always try to stick as close as I can to the history. So the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was my template. That's what I used. And so it was a matter of thinking about my characters, and almost all of my characters were real people. And so, especially Emma, the women in the story, what were they thinking when these things happened? What were they doing? How did they respond to it? How did it impact them? And so that's how I would use what I know happened as a springboard for my story and for my characters and how they would respond to each other and to the situation. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, well enough. Yeah.
It's such a broad question. It's just interesting to sort of get
different answers.
But I think, one of the things that I think most historical fiction novelists say they focus, or at least I think this is where Stephen and I fall, is like most of us focus on telling a good story first, trying to keep the history accurate. But if you have to sort of stretch things or move things a little bit, you can, and then you can tell people in the historical note at the end of the book and say, you know, I fudged the dates here, or I compressed the timeline, or I did something. I think there are some writers that find that completely anathema and say, like, no, there's no way I'm not going to, do anything that breaks the timeline or, the known facts. But it's always interesting to sort of speak about it and see. I think there's a different a degree of flexibility towards the accuracy or that people have.
Right, exactly. And I try, well, as I said, there's not so much written about what the women were doing. So in a way, I have carte blanche in terms of what Emma actually was, how she spent her days. But one of my favorite parts of writing a novel is writing the author's note at the end, where I do talk about the history and where I did make changes. And none of my changes were enormous. I had a love story between Emma and her stepson. That was, who knew if that happened? No one ever said anything about it, but they wouldn't, would they? It's something that would have been kept secret. In the book that I'm writing now, I've sent Emma off to Rome. And I think most scholars would say, oh, she didn't go to Rome. She was long in the tooth. She wouldn't have gone to Rome. And I'm thinking, I don't know. She might have. If I was married to a king and he was going to the coronation of the Holy Roman Emperor, and I was very religious, and I got to see the Pope and go to make a pilgrimage to Rome, I would have gone. Yeah. So I don't know, but that's something that it's going to have to be explained in the author's note at the end. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sounds like all roads lead to Rome. My last book, my characters went to Rome, and I was talking about a future book. I'm going to go to Rome again.
I was thinking about you.
Yeah, it has a draw. It definitely has an attraction. Rome, or whichever period of history. I think it's a really interesting. Obviously, it's a really interesting place, but it's incredible the draw it's got from the historical perspective. But talking about what you do and what you don't know from the reading, you said there's not much written about Emma. You've talked about being in Gladstone's library and reading all those books there and doing research. So apart from the reading dusty tomes in libraries, do you do other types of research? Are you a hands-on kind of person? Do you dress up in armor, join reenactment groups, or go horse riding, or do you sail Viking ships? I mean, what have you done anything like that?
I did when I first started. Well, I'm more, let's call it boots on the ground rather than hands-on. But I did start at the very beginning when I knew Emma was going to be on a horse. So I hadn't been horseback riding in years. So I went horseback riding, which would have been nothing like what she experienced, I'm sure. But at least it got me on a horse and thinking about what that was like. And I have her commenting about how she hasn't been on a horse in a while and she has trouble walking or something like that in the very first book. I have not been on, to my husband's great relief, a Viking ship. I really hope to get on one when I visited Roskilde at the ship museum there. But we were just outside. We were in late October, and we'd missed it by a couple days, the ability to actually get on a ship and go rowing. My husband was really glad about that. So I haven't, but I've seen the ships. I've been to Oslo and to Roskilde and looked at the Viking ships there. I've been to Normandy and had a map of what Normandy was like in the 11th century and sort of walked where the walls would have been. I've been to Winchester, London, of course. I've been to Exeter, which was one of Emma's properties. And so, yeah, I've gone to a really interesting exhibits at the Medieval Congress held in Kalamazoo, Michigan, every year, International Medieval Congress. And they have exhibits. So I've done some sword wielding. I've learned how to hold a sword, a broadsword. And I've seen people weave and seen the results of their weaving and seen what the men wore underneath their armor, their mail, the padding that they've made. And I've held a mail shirt in my hand and seen how heavy it is. So that That's about all I could do.
That sounds like a lot of
Yeah.
hands-on
Oh, that's
stuff.
quite a lot. Eh?
I think a lot more than many writers would do. And I think it's really interesting because I think we all would agree that the more hands-on stuff or boots on the ground stuff you can do, the better. But I think saying that, you can write a fantastically immersive historical fiction without ever leaving your house. I think, and that's
Right.
that's really interesting for me. I've mentioned it before. Rosemary Sutcliffe, who I met when she was very elderly, and I
Really?
met her. Yes, I was doing my
Wow.
English at school, and my English teacher knew her and invited us around her house, and we went and visited this very, very diminutive elderly lady who was very, very severely handicapped, and she was wheelchair bound, and she hadn't left the house, or she hadn't traveled or anything since she was a teenager. She'd been very, very ill all her life, but she wrote these incredible sweeping epics of Vikings and Romans and people fighting and doing all these incredible things, and you just think the imagination is an amazing place. It's amazing.
It is.
And
Especially nowadays, because we've got the internet, so you can research much easier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This, I mean, saying that the imagination is incredible. If you can actually go and, like you say, ride a horse or do something like that, there are those little moments that you can then put into a book which have that real ring of authenticity. Like you said, the aches from riding after not having ridden for a while, because I've got something similar in a recent book as well. After going riding in Oregon, and it's after a few hours in the saddle, coming off and realizing that my legs were completely numb. I'd kind of forgotten or I don't think I'd ever ridden that long before. I'd ridden like an hour or two before. I'd never ridden that long before, and I'd never been in the saddle for that long. And getting off the horse, and the people there in the ranch said, like, be careful, stand still for a bit, let the blood go back to your legs before you try to walk. And someone that was not in our party, but someone who was on the ranch, didn't, and they just fell flat on their face. They just said, "No, I'm fine," and they just jumped off the horse, and just their legs just gave way and they collapsed.
That was you, wasn't it, Matthew?
It wasn't me. It wasn't me. I actually listened to instructions.
Well, there are other things too. When I went to Exeter for the first time, and I looked around me, and all the buildings are made of a red stone. It's blood red. I never would have known that if I hadn't actually gone. God, there was another thing. Oh, Shaftesbury Abbey is up on a high hill. And I didn't know that until I went up and thought, oh my God, they would have had to have gone up this hill. How did they get up there? Were they walking? Were they riding a horse? What? And I'm going to be using that in this next book. So yeah, those sorts of things, they're just little tiny things. And maybe, I don't know, do readers enjoy all of that? Do they get it? I think they probably do. They feel
I think they
immersed.
do.
They feel they're in the place. Yeah.
I think if you drop those little details in well, it just adds a whole level of immersion, doesn't it? Because either the people that are reading haven't experienced those things, and so that it's conjuring a realistic image or a more complete image, or there are people that have got experience of riding or of being in the place of Shaftesbury Abbey or whatever, and it brings to them the reality of the situation, and they think, oh yeah, that rings true because I've been there. One of the best things I had from writing one of the A Time for Swords books was someone who's a keen sailor contacted me and said, "Oh, the sailing seems really believable, really well done." And I've never sailed on a Viking ship, and I've never sailed really. I mean, I just had to sort of base it on research and imagination. I've been on a few boats, but that's about it.
Yeah,
so
that's
it's great when you manage to conjure something that people think, "Wow, this feels realistic." So you think,
he's an expert.
Yeah, exactly. The number of times that we get told, you're obviously an expert of this period of history or this specific thing. Really, my latest thing.
I just went on a ferry once.
Yeah, I went on a ferry and I've got a good imagination. Yeah.
Well, Matthew and I enjoy writing fight scenes. Do you like writing action or battle scenes? And what type of scenes do you find easiest to write? And what about the most difficult?
Okay, well, I do not like writing battle scenes because I've never been in a battle. So I read a lot of I read your books, and I read Bernard Cornwell's books. And of course, he can make a battle last 10 pages. If I write a battle, it's going to be a page and a half. And I've gotten around that by showing the battle through the eyes of a woman who's watching. And I've done that probably once in every one of my books. If I have to have a battle, it's either going to be reported back to a woman, or it's going to be through the eyes of the woman who's watching the battle. Because I think I can relate to that, to someone who's watching it. I went to the Battle of Hastings back in 1014. 1014.
1014. Wow, you
2014.
traveled a
Ah,
long.
you missed it by 50 years.
You don't look that old. I mean, seriously.
Believe me, I was really rooting for Harold. So I did, I have seen that, and that was interesting. There's a guy there with a microphone. He was getting some things wrong, by the way, but that was pretty interesting to go to that. And so the rest of your question is, what scenes do I like to write? Gosh, you know what? I like to have written. I don't especially like to write. And I find, I'm very methodical in my writing. So when I write a scene, I open with sort of an overview of where we are, why we're here, who's there, what are they doing. And sometimes just getting a character into the room is a struggle, a real struggle. I like writing dialogue. I like the back and forth of dialogue. I think that's a lot of fun. And because I have to be back and forth, you have to know what's in the head of all the characters. I'm sure you know all of this. And so for me, that's the fun part of the job. But all that other stuff that you have to put in all around, that's tough.
That's really interesting. You said that describes pretty accurately how I feel about it. I like to have written. I don't actually like the process of writing, and I think sometimes that gets translated into I like people say, I like the editing process. I don't like the writing process so much, which I think is basically the same thing. I don't particularly like editing per se, but I understand that it's that feeling of relief almost that you read something you've written and think, oh my goodness, this actually makes sense and it's okay, and now there's something on the page that I can polish and get better. But
exactly.
The building blocks of creating the scenes and the chapters and the whole book is very tough sometimes, or always, sometimes more than others. But,
always.
Yeah, and I think it gets more difficult. So I'm writing both Stephen and I have written, I don't know, well over a dozen books now each, and I find each book somehow feels more difficult to write than the one before, and I don't know if that's just me, or if I'm mad, or do you feel that way? I mean, this is almost a question for both of you. I mean, do you feel it gets easier or more difficult as you?
Oh, it never gets easier. It gets more difficult, I think, with each book. And having said that, I'm working on my fourth book, and it seems to me enormously hard. But part of the reason is because with each book, I think I'm attempting something that I didn't do before. So, for example, with this new book, I'm covering 30 years, whereas each previous book only covered 5. And so I have to do the skipping of time. And I've just been trying to put on the page everything that happened in the last 8 years that I've just skipped over. How do I do that? Do I do it through dialogue? Do I do it in Emma's head? Do I try to be the voiceover narrator that tells that story? So just even it's taken me a month to write a single chapter because it's just so hard to figure out how to make that transition from 1 year to 8 years later. I've never done that before.
Yeah, without it being boring or the editor saying show don't tell.
Yeah.
You don't want a big info dump. That's the hard part there.
It's difficult. Yeah, I mean, I often do smaller jumps, but even those are difficult. Even when you jump like a week or 2 weeks or a month or something, those are still difficult because you don't want to bog the story down in like a month has gone by and not much has happened. But at the same time, you need to give something to the reader. You can't just start the next scene and really not mention nothing's happened. So it's difficult to know how much to give. And I think from speaking from my own experience, I think that sometimes I try to fill in the back story too much when I think readers are actually very, very capable of making that jump with a very sort of small reference to the time passing. They're like, okay, 5 minutes later, I've got it now. I'm 5 years later. Whereas I think I'm trying to think as the writer, I'm thinking, but what did they do then, and how come what happened to that character, and what happened to this child, and did this happen? And I'll try to sort of put all these bits of detail in people's memories and backstory and comments in conversation and stuff. And maybe it's too much, sometimes less is more, and readers are much more intelligent than sometimes. It's not that we don't give them credit. I don't give them credit for it, but I think that people need everything painted for them sometimes, every detail, and they don't.
Yeah, some readers maybe.
Some readers maybe do, but yeah.
Well, and the thing that I'm running against, in addition to that, the thing that I'm running up against, I ran into it yesterday. I went over what I'd been written, and I thought, oh, well, yeah, this happened. This actually is historically accurate, and the reader doesn't care. They don't need to know, that Duke Robert went on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and died of a plague on the way home. They don't need to know that. They just need to know he's dead.
Yeah, I mean, unless it's
Done.
interesting and somehow it makes it interesting. But yeah, if it's just if he dies off camera, as it were, and it's interesting. Yeah.
Unless he's the main character.
Yeah, well, he's not.
Yeah.
And then it's just you're in Emma's memory, and so how is she responding to these things? So you have to constantly be going, okay, I'm in Emma's head. What is she? How does she? What's the physical and emotional reaction to these memories that she's having?
Yeah.
And that's all part of it.
And there's definitely a balance about the amount of detail to fit in, because I remember reading Lonesome Dove, Larry McMurtry's fantastic Pulitzer Prize winning book. It's one of my favorite books, and it's got a huge cast of characters. I mean, it's an amazing book. It's like nearly 1,000 pages long. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. If you haven't read it, Pat, definitely give it a try.
I saw the show.
The show is great as well.
Show.
The TV show is brilliant as well, but the book is even better, in my opinion. It's fantastic. But anyway,
probably.
But although the show is a very, very good adaptation, but when I read the sequel, I remember after in the first chapter, one of a couple of minor characters, a couple of major characters have just been killed off in the intervening couple of years or whatever since the previous books happened, and he glosses it over. It almost, it's like, where's so and so, and he goes, oh no, he fell off his horse and got killed last winter. That's it. Which is very matter of fact, like it would have been maybe in the West, and it's a cowboy telling another cowboy that the horse has rolled over and killed some guy in a gulch, and that was it. Sad, and they move on. But as a reader, you're going, what? It's like this guy was like a main character. It was like a huge story arc in the first book, and that's all I get, and so sometimes it's different ways of approaching it. And I suppose maybe part of the reason was to show the type of world they're in and the type of characters they are and the way they respond and react to it. And you as a reader maybe are thinking, oh my goodness, I want more information, but they don't need it because they just say, yeah, it's one of those things that's happened on the ranch. But anyway, moving on to my next question. I was thinking that I seem to remember years ago, or a few years ago, that you did a series of comment posts on your blog about the Last Kingdom and maybe the Vikings as well, and the TV shows. And you were sort of looking at the historical accuracy and what had happened in each episode and things like that, or the lack of historical accuracy, perhaps. Are you able to enjoy those type of shows despite what, in my opinion, is the terrible lack of historical accuracy?
Absolutely. I love a good story. I just love stories and storytelling. Although I will say Vikings Valhalla did some horrible things to Emma. The first season was fine. The second season was terrible in terms of what they did with her. So that, when it gets close to home, there were a couple things in Vikings that I didn't like. And again, it's when they really twist it so much that you just say, oh, come on,
So it's more about the storylines than the actual things, like the type of clothes they're wearing or the type of swords and stuff like that.
Right. And some of their swords look like butter knives instead of swords, big, long butter knives. And I thought, well, they're trying to protect their actors. Okay, fair enough. And I think, you have to look at it as a piece of art that is being presented, and there are different people working on that art, and they are costume designers. And they're martial arts people that they're working with. And okay, they had the shields wrong. I don't care. It doesn't hurt the story.
And that's how I feel as well.
Yeah. So you have to let the professionals who are working on that show do their job. It's when the writers get something so wrong, so historically inaccurate, that I can't bear it. So, and then I have to just say, well, it's kind of like the sagas, we don't know how much of that was real. And so they're just using these characters to tell a story. They're not trying to tell the character's story. It's another way to look at it.
No, I agree with you. I know it annoys Matthew, the things like the armor being wrong and that kind of thing, but I don't really care as long as the story's good.
I get the thing of telling a good story and that it's art and everything, and I try to look past it. But what annoys me is just the fact that you get these interviews with the cast, with the costume designers and stuff, and they say things like, "Well, we don't really know what they were wearing" and things like that. And I'm like, "What are you talking about? We do know what people were wearing. So, and if we know what they're wearing, why don't you just make them wear that?" I don't understand. It's trying to get my head around why they take decisions that for no reason, really. It just seems to be just to make people look like bikers, as opposed
I think there's a reason. I think there's a reason, and that is it's a visual representation. If everybody was dressed in sackcloth, which is what they probably were in those days, it's boring to look at.
Yeah.
So you've got a costume designer that's going, okay, how can we, show that this guy's special? How can we show that this guy's a serf? How can we, there are a lot of decisions, I think, that probably go into that. And I give them the leeway in my own head, to do it. So,
I'm with you.
It's obviously it's obviously the more common response is that it doesn't matter as much because
most people probably don't know.
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't know that the sword was wrong or whatever anyway, so they don't care. We're collaborating on a novella set in the mid-14th century, and I've noticed that Matthew and I have slightly different styles of writing when it comes to dialogue. So how do you approach the issue of language when writing dialogue for characters from a different era? Do you use modern phrases or try to write in a kind of archaic style, or what seems like it anyway?
Yeah, so this is something that sorry, it's interesting because we haven't got to the point of editing our novella together yet. But Stephen's written his half, I've written most of my half, but there's a few chapters I need to finish off, and we haven't sort of really done the finished editing merging process.
Yeah.
But we both agree that our styles of writing match very well. That the story works fine. But Stephen did point out in his last episode that we discussed it on a bonus episode for our Patreon page. He did point out that the one difference that he could see between it was the way we tackled dialogue, and that my dialogue was slightly more tending toward like slightly more archaic, oldie worldy kind of dialogue, whereas his was more modern and straightforward. And that maybe we need to look at that and how to make sure that the two styles merged. So yeah, what's your approach?
I try to sprinkle in Anglo-Saxon words periodically. And I do not use contractions at all.
Well, that's what Matthew does.
That's exactly
and I'm the opposite.
Yeah. So, and I try, for me, it's a difference. How do the older characters speak differently than the younger men? And so the younger men there might be more cursing among the younger men. And I forget what other things I try to do. For Emma, who's a Norman, I throw in words that are more French background related. So I have an OED on my computer so I can go back and see. I really limit myself to words that are 14th century and earlier, where they come from. So, and I try to limit them to Old English or Latin, and in Emma's case, French. So, like when I want to say that a woman pirouettes, I wouldn't say the word pirouette, I would say spins.
Yeah.
So you try to, that's how I go about it. And I don't think it's particularly archaic, but I think it's less, I don't know, Lindsay Davis and her Roman novels, they all speak modern day English.
Yeah.
Probably more like what you're doing, Stephen.
Yeah, no, I do the same as you. Like, I won't use a word that I know for a fact wasn't around back then. I'll try, or maybe within a couple of 100 years or something, I'll maybe use it because it is still really old then. But no, I agree with you. I do the same apart from the contractions because I just think people use them in speech. So it just flows better to me. It seems more realistic to have someone saying I've rather than I have. I just think it works better. But I take the point that it does seem more archaic and more old-fashioned for historical books, so that's why a lot of authors do it.
And what's interesting is I was listening to one of my audiobooks the other day, and the narrator, even though I wrote I have, she says I've.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I'm thinking now. I'm wondering whether I think I might use contractions sometimes in not in dialogue. Descriptions of stuff where I think it works better. I might say,
right.
they hadn't walked for very long or whatever. I'll throw in some contractions, just to speak, like to make it feel less, I don't know, pretentious or laborious or whatever to read. But maybe I do it less in dialogue. But it's not something I'm really conscious about. So I do consciously do the thing of using words that are more rooted in pre-Norman conquest and stuff like that. But and I've got certain characters, like you said, with Emma, that you'll go for maybe more French words or words that have come from the Latin or the French root, and I do that. Like I've got a monk that I think, well, okay, he can use Greek root words, and, because he's more erudite and he reads more and stuff. So these sort of things is interesting. We all go down those same sort of paths, but the contractions or not, I don't think that's something I really consciously thought about. So it'd be interesting when we do get to edit and polish it together to see how different things are and where we draw the line and what we do about it, whether we push one, whether we merge them and sort of get a uniform sort of style. But I think sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Kate Quinn and, I forget, Janie Chang wrote a book together, and they wrote from two different points of view. So Kate was one character's story and Janie was the other character's story. And so they didn't have that issue because they were, two different people. Even though the characters interacted, I don't remember how they got through that. But
well, we're basically doing the same.
So are you doing that?
We're doing something similar, much the same.
But they do meet each other, so it's as like two worlds colliding, really.
Yeah, I think when the worlds collide, maybe it's not such an issue, or maybe we just keep the same. You keep your way of doing the dialogue for those characters, and I keep mine in the collision of the worlds when they meet, and that's it. And we just allow that to be a bit of a shock. The other thing is, though, the story is set in Stephen's world, so it's a novella set in Stephen's world. So if we were going to go either way, I guess it would be to change my dialogue to fit more Stephen's world, because this is fitting within his series of novels and novellas.
Right.
Where I've created a new character that's in there, but the heroes are his heroes that have been in other stories. So it would make
not
sense.
really my heroes.
Well, heroes that you write about.
As Friar Tuck and Little John, they're not really my heroes.
Yeah.
Although
I don't know how you can do it from a distance. I think you should be in the same room shouting at each other.
No, that would be terrible.
Your dialogue.
The best thing is that we're doing it at distance, so we don't have to shout at each other. Otherwise, we'd kill each other. It's been a really interesting process, because so far we've done it very much in isolation. I wrote a few chapters myself back in January, February, and then Stephen didn't pick it up until March, April time. And then now we're going to get
another
later. It's going to be a gap of a couple of months, and then when I finish my novel, then I'm going to pick it up and do the polishing probably in September or something like that. So it's quite an interesting process, but I think it's definitely going to work. We've got something to work on.
Sounds fun.
Definitely a learning curve and a challenge, but good.
Sure.
So we're coming to the end of our time chatting together. We've got a couple of questions to ask before we go. So the first one really is kind of just the end of the interview, and then we've got an extra question that we'll then ask you, that we're going to give to our patrons as part of a bonus thing for them. So the first one is really just for you to tell us. You've told us a little bit about that you're working on a new Emma of Normandy book. So it's to tell us a little bit more about that, and just when is it going to come out? Do you have a title yet? Any plans, beyond that?
No plans. Just to get the book written. Don't have any idea when it's going to be out. Don't have a title yet. The working title is Emma Book 4. And that's about all I could tell you. It covers the years from about 1019 to about 1045. So it covers the period. The hard part about this book is that it's the first part of it is Canut's reign.
Okay.
And everything was very calm in England during Canut's reign. All the action was happening overseas in Norway, in Denmark, in Italy. And so what do when there's nothing happening? You skip.
Yeah.
You either create some
something
jeopardy,
up.
make something up, or you skip it. Yeah.
Well, they did something in Vikings Valhalla. They created something which is absolutely ludicrous and horrible. So I'm not going that route. I'm taking her to Rome. And other than that, then we're skipping. And then poor Canute has to die. And then things get really hairy again with what happens towards the end of her life. So basically, I'm not taking it all the way to where Emma dies, but certainly to where she kind of goes into retirement.
Do you think this will be the last book in the Emma of Normandy series then?
Well, as far as I was concerned, the third book was the last book. I don't see how I can go beyond this one.
So I don't know much about Emma of Normandy and her history. Does she have children? Is there a chance that you could do a spin-off, continue the series with her children?
Oh, dear God. No, but her children have grown up in the book that I'm working on. And of course, one of her children was Edward the Confessor, and then we get into 1066. So no, I don't think so. I think I'm going to rest on my laurels, and just getting this book out is going to be enough of a challenge for me.
Right.
And then maybe think about something else in the future.
Maybe.
If the muse strikes. See. Who knows? Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks ever so much, Pat, for coming on. Patricia Bracewell. We call you Pat, but that's because you told us we could. But Patricia Bracewell, thank you very, very much for coming on. And I hope you best of luck. I wish you best of luck with the writing of your fourth book, and look forward to seeing that. And maybe we'll see you over in England in another Historical Novel Society conference sometime in the future. You never know.
Hopefully. Thank you so much. I just really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks very much, Pat.
We enjoyed talking with you too. Brilliant. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That's it for today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to leave a review and subscribe to this podcast. Thanks to all of our patrons, and a special shout out to our Patreon producers, Adam Turner, Ben Mayer, Andy Maxwell, Ben Fox, Daryl Hare, and George Johnson.
You can sign up on Patreon to support us from as little as £1 per month, or buy us a beer at the link tree in the show notes.
Until next time on Rock Paper Swords, it's goodbye from me, Matthew Harvey.
And it's goodbye from me, Stephen A. Mackay.
And remember, whatever action and adventure you have going on in your life, be kind,
stay safe,
and happy reading.